The forgotten debt. The galaxy had long been ruled by powerful empires, each one claiming its piece of the stars. For centuries, they had fought battles and made alliances, all to maintain their hold on the countless worlds that lay beneath their control. But among all the races, one stood out above the rest: the Deathworlders. The Deathworlders were not like any other species in the galaxy. They were born on a planet where survival was the hardest thing to do. Their home was a place of constant danger, where wild beasts roamed and the land itself seemed to fight against them. It was a world where only the strongest survived. The Deathworlders had evolved into the fiercest warriors the galaxy had ever seen. No enemy was too great, no battle too tough. The Deathworlders had once been the backbone of many empires' military might, feared and respected by all who knew of them. But as time passed, the Deathworlders became more than just soldiers. They became forgotten. The empires they had served grew greedy, shifting their focus away from old alliances in favor of new opportunities. The Deathworlders, once loyal, were pushed aside, their sacrifices ignored. The empires had debts to them, debts owed in blood and honor, but they chose to forget. These debts were buried beneath the weight of time. The galaxy moved on. However, on the outskirts of the galaxy, on a planet far from the centers of power, a signal was sent. It was faint at first, a whisper in the vast silence of space. The message contained a single word: remember. The leaders of the empire thought little of it, dismissing it as a message from some forgotten world. They were too busy with their endless wars, their greed, their expansion. But to the Deathworlders, the message was a call. It was a call to justice, a call to right the wrongs that had been done to them on the Deathworlders' home planet. The leaders of their people gathered. They were not a large group, but they were a strong one. The Deathworlders had no need for large armies anymore. Their reputation alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. As they stood together, their faces hardened. They knew what had to be done. It had been too long since their people had been wronged, too long since they had been forgotten. The time for justice had come. The Deathworlders were not interested in revenge, but in something far more important: justice. The empires had taken from them, betrayed them, and now it was time for the scales to be balanced. The message had been received, and they would make sure the galaxy never forgot the debt it owed them. The Deathworlders prepared their ships, sleek and powerful, built for war and survival. They didn't need grand fleets or massive armies. They only needed themselves. The ships were their home, and their warriors were the deadliest the galaxy had ever known. As they launched into space, the galaxy would soon feel the weight of their arrival, in the heart of the Galactic Empire. The leaders sat in their great councils, oblivious to the storm that was coming. They were too focused on their own power, their own battles. The thought that the Deathworlders might return never crossed their minds. They believed they had time, that nothing could threaten their dominance. But as the Deathworlders' ships entered the galaxy's borders, the stars seemed to tremble. The great empires would soon learn that they had made a grave mistake. They had forgotten a debt that could not be erased, and now the Deathworlders were coming to collect. The empire's might, built on countless worlds and armies, would face its first real test in centuries. The balance of power would shift, and it would shift fast, as the Deathworlders approached the first empire's borders. The message was clear: justice will be served. There was no fear in their hearts, only a cold certainty that the galaxy would remember. They would take back what was owed to them, and nothing would stop them. The empires had once ruled with an iron fist, but now, for the first time in a long while, they would face a challenge that could break their hold on the stars. And the Deathworlders were not coming to negotiate, they were coming to collect. The countdown had begun, and the galaxy's fate rested in the hands of those it had forgotten. The rise of the Deathworlders. First signs of the Deathworlders' return were subtle at first, just small. Disturbances on the edges of Empire-controlled space. Ships disappearing from radar, sudden bursts of energy that seemed to appear out of nowhere, and whispers in the darkest corners of the galaxy. But soon, these strange occurrences could no longer be ignored. At first, the empires thought it was a coincidence. Perhaps it was a new enemy, or maybe just an isolated threat. The mighty empires had long been accustomed to dealing with dangers from the unknown corners of the galaxy. They had built their power on war, on conquest, and nothing had ever truly threatened their grip on the stars. But the signs only grew stronger. They could no longer deny the truth: the Deathworlders had returned. The galaxy was not prepared for them. The Deathworlders were not like the enemies the empires had faced before. They were not concerned with territory, wealth, or politics. The Deathworlders' only goal was to right the wrongs done to them, to bring balance to a galaxy that had long been ruled by corruption. They had no need for diplomacy or empty threats. Their mission was simple: to make the galaxy remember. The Deathworlder ships began to arrive at the outer edges of Empire space, silently appearing in the darkness of the void. These ships were unlike any the empires had ever seen. Built from the strongest metals, reinforced by their home planet's harsh environment, they were a true testament to the strength of the Deathworlders' people. Their sleek, jagged designs were sharp like a blade, and their weapons were as deadly as their warriors. The ships were not meant for subtlety. They were meant to strike fear. The first empire they reached was one of the largest in the galaxy, the Vention Empire. It was a mighty force, known for its vast fleets and powerful weapons. But even they were unprepared for what came next. A single Deathworlder ship appeared in the Vention system, slipping past the outer defenses without a trace. The Empire's fleet scrambled to respond, sending dozens of ships to intercept the intruder, but it was too late. The Deathworlder ship unleashed its full firepower in a single devastating strike. In seconds, entire fleets were torn apart, their ships reduced to nothing but debris floating in space. The Vention capital, once a shining jewel of the galaxy, was left in ruins. The Empire's leaders were in shock. How could this have happened? They had the largest fleet in the galaxy, the most advanced technology, yet they had been completely overrun by a single ship. They had no answers. Only fear. The Deathworlders had proven something in that moment. They were not just a threat. They were a force to be reckoned with. The message they sent was clear. No empire was safe, no matter how powerful they thought they were. As word spread across the galaxy, other empires began to take notice. The Vention Empire had fallen in an instant, and others knew they could be next. Leaders of the other empires began to fear for their own survival. Messages were sent back and forth in hushed voices, discussing alliances, strategies, and how to deal with the unstoppable force that was coming for them all. But the Deathworlders were not interested in alliances. They didn't want to negotiate. They had come to collect what was owed to them, and they would stop at nothing to make sure the galaxy knew the price of betrayal. The next empire they targeted was the Tauridian Empire, known for its massive warships and its brutal tactics. But the Deathworlders were always one step ahead. They didn't fight with the same tactics that the empires used. They didn't need to. They were too fast, too ruthless, and too smart. Their ships tore through the Tauridian defenses with ease, their warriors landing on the surface of the capital world. The Tauridian leaders had no choice but to surrender. It was then that the empires realized the true scale of the Deathworlders' power. They had no need for vast fleets or endless armies. They fought with the precision of a blade, striking where their enemies were weakest. They didn't need to conquer worlds, they needed to deliver justice. As the Deathworlders continued their campaign, they left a trail of destruction behind them, but they also left something else: fear. The galaxy had never known a force like this, and the once uncheckable empires began to question their own power. The Deathworlders were not just taking revenge. They were changing the very balance of the galaxy. The Deathworlders didn't care about the galaxy's politics. They didn't care about borders or alliances. They cared only about one thing: justice. The empires would learn that when they betrayed the Deathworlders, they had set in motion an unstoppable wave of retribution that would change the galaxy forever. Asterisk. The Empire's last stand. The Empires, now reeling from the Deathworlders' swift and devastating strikes, were no longer the confident powers they once were. The galaxy's once mighty leaders had been brought to their knees in a matter of weeks. Panic spread like wildfire across the star systems. The great galactic empires had never expected their reign to end like this. By the hand of a species they had cast aside, in the great halls of the remaining empire councils, leaders met in desperate secrecy. They gathered in dark, smoky rooms, knowing that their time was running out. The Death Worlders had proved to be unlike any enemy they had faced. They were swift, merciless, and their tactics were far beyond anything the empires could comprehend. The might of entire fleets had been reduced to dust in the blink of an eye. And now every corner of the galaxy seemed to tremble under their threat. At the heart of the Venetian Empire, the once proud capital lay in ruins. The once glorious monuments to their power were nothing more than crumbling stone and burning wreckage. The Venetian High Command knew they could not recover from this blow. But they still had one last hope, an alliance of the remaining empires. If they could come together, they might stand a chance. The leaders of the Talaridian, Carrion, and Venetian empires met in a final, desperate summit. They discussed every option, no matter how desperate. For days they debated, sending messengers back and forth, coordinating strategies. Their goal was simple: destroy the Death Worlders before they could topple the rest of the galaxy. But their strength was fading, and the alliances they forged were fragile at best. Each empire had its own agenda, its own set of priorities, and none were eager to lay down their pride. For the sake of unity, the time had come for the final stand. The great galactic fleets, once the proud defenders of empire rule, assembled in the darkness of space. Massive ships, each one a symbol of the power the empires once wielded, now faced a threat they could not understand. The Death Worlders, in their wisdom, had struck too quickly, too decisively. For the empires to mount a proper defense, the fleets moved as one, thousands of warships, armed with weapons of unimaginable power, converging on the edge of the galaxy. Their target was clear: the Death Worlders' stronghold in the Outer Rim, where their ships had first emerged. The Empire's final assault was set into motion. But as the fleets approached, something unexpected happened. A signal, faint at first, then growing louder, echoed across the galaxy. It was a warning. The Death Worlders had sent a message, not through any technological marvel, but through the old ways, the old words. Do not try to stand against us. You will only fall. The debt has been paid. The warning was received across the galaxy, but not a single fleet hesitated. They had no choice now but to continue the attack. Too much had been lost. Too much had been destroyed. This was their last chance to stop the Death Worlders. As the combined fleet entered the Death Worlder-controlled space, the first sign of what awaited them came as a flash of light in the distance. A single Death Worlder ship, massive and powerful, emerging from the darkness of the void. It was a ship like no other, its sleek form radiating an aura of unmatched strength. The Death Worlders did not need to speak. Their presence alone was enough to paralyze their enemies with fear. The battle began without warning. The combined fleet fired its first salvo, a burst of energy that lit up the blackness of space. But the Death Worlder ship was too fast, too skilled. It dodged the barrage effortlessly, returning fire with a series of powerful strikes. The energy from their weapons cracked through the fleets like thunder, tearing ships apart in a single clean shot. One by one, the Empire's warships fell, their shields failing, their weapons useless against the onslaught. The rest of the fleet followed, charging into battle with what little hope remained. But the Death Worlders were not interested in a drawn-out fight. They were precise, like hunters chasing their prey. Their ships cut through the galaxy's greatest fleets like a blade through paper. No matter how many ships the empires threw at them, it was never enough. The Death Worlders always seemed one step ahead as the battle raged. The leaders of the empires watched helplessly from their command stations, knowing that their forces were doomed. The Death Worlders were relentless, and their victory seemed inevitable. They had underestimated them for far too long. The galaxy's mightiest fleets had been shattered, their pride and power broken before the might of the Death Worlders. It was then that the empires realized the truth. This war had never been about winning. It had always been about justice. The Death Worlders had not come to conquer the galaxy. They had come to restore the balance, to make the empires remember what they had forgotten. And with every empire they destroyed, they were one step closer to completing their mission. As the final battles unfolded, it became clear the Death Worlders would not stop until they had taken everything from those who had wronged them. The galaxy had no idea what was coming next. But it was sure of one thing: there would be no escape. Asterisk the reckoning. The galaxy was in chaos. The combined fleets of the empires lay in ruins, their once proud warships drifting as lifeless husks through the cold void of space. The Deathworlders' justice had been swift and unyielding. No empire had escaped their reach. The galaxy had underestimated them for too long, and now the consequences were clear. The Deathworlders were not just warriors. They were the galaxy's reckoning. In the shattered remains of the once glorious tyranny and empire, the leaders found themselves in their final moments of power. The capital, once a shining symbol of the empire's might, was now a charred ruin, with fires raging across the surface. The Tyranian High Command had failed to anticipate the true fury of the Deathworlders. They had relied on their military might, their vast fleets, their technology, but none of it had mattered. The Deathworlders fought not for territory or wealth, but for something far greater: justice. As the Deathworlders approached the heart of the Tyranian Empire, the remaining leaders gathered in a desperate attempt to preserve their power. They knew that the end was near, and yet they still clung to the hope that they could negotiate, that there might be a way to escape the wrath that was closing in. But they had already made their mistake, underestimating the Deathworlders. Now, the time for negotiation was over. Now, it was time for reckoning. The Deathworlder ships cut through the final defenses with ease, their weapons striking with precision. The Tyranian fleets were no match for the power of the Deathworlders, and soon their defenses collapsed entirely. One by one, the Empire's strongholds fell. The leaders, once so certain of their victory, could only watch in helpless silence as their empire crumbled to dust. But even in their final moments, the Tyranian leaders did not understand. They had never understood the purpose of the Deathworlders' vengeance. It wasn't about destruction. It was about restoring balance, a balance that had been thrown off by centuries of oppression and betrayal. The Deathworlders had not come to destroy for the sake of destruction. They had come to right the wrongs of the past, as the capital's final defenses were obliterated. The Deathworlders made their way to the heart of the Empire, the towering spire where the Tyranian leaders had once ruled. The building stood tall amidst the ruin, a symbol of their arrogance. But even this final bastion of power was no match for the Deathworlders. Their leader, a figure known only as Korak, stood at the forefront, his eyes cold and unwavering. He had seen the suffering the empires had caused, the countless lives lost under their rule. He had seen the Deathworlders' people reduced to nothing more than pawns in a galactic game of power. And now he would make them see what they had done. Korak stepped into the heart of the Empire's throne room. The last of the Tyranian leaders kneeling before him, their once mighty hands trembling in fear. The silence was thick with tension as Korak spoke, his voice steady and final. "You," he said, his words ringing through the shattered hall, "have taken everything from us. You have betrayed us, stolen from us, and forgotten the debts you owe. But now, you will remember. The galaxy will remember." With those final words, the Deathworlders completed their mission. They had come to balance the scales, and in doing so, they had brought the tyrannical empires to their knees. The galaxy would never be the same again, but the Deathworlders did not stay to rule. They had no interest in the throne. They did not want power or control. They had come to restore order, to make the galaxy remember the cost of betrayal. And once their mission was complete, they would leave as quietly as they had arrived, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed, as the last of the Tyranian Empire fell. Korak and his warriors turned away, knowing that their work was done. The empires would no longer oppress the weak. The Deathworlders had ensured that justice would reign, and that the mistakes of the past would never be forgotten. The galaxy, once divided by greed and power, now stood on the brink of a new era, one where the strong would no longer dominate the weak, and the debts of the past would be paid in full. And for the Deathworlders, there was no need for celebration. Justice had been served, and with it their purpose fulfilled. Asterisk. Galactic justice served the galaxy was quiet. For the first time in centuries, the endless wars between empires had ceased. The mighty fleets that once ruled with an iron fist now lay in ruins, their commanders scattered or in hiding. The stars, once a battleground for power-hungry factions, now held a strange, uneasy peace in the wake of the Death Worlders campaign. The remaining galactic leaders were forced to confront the undeniable truth: the old order was gone. The galaxy had been reshaped, not by war or conquest, but by a relentless pursuit of justice. The Death Worlders, having completed their mission, had faded into the vastness of space. Their ships, once the harbingers of doom, now moved silently through the stars, leaving behind only whispers of their presence. The galaxy, once so accustomed to the sound of battle, now had only the echoes of their footsteps. As the last of the empires crumbled, new governments began to take form. The lessons learned from the Death Worlders' arrival were too painful to ignore. The galaxy was no longer governed by power and domination. It was now governed by the will of the people, those who had suffered under the tyranny of the empires and had long been silenced. For the first time in millennia, a council of representatives from the outer colonies, the forgotten worlds and the once oppressed systems, was formed, but the road to peace was not easy. The remnants of the empires still clung to power, unwilling to let go of their reins. They had been defeated, yes, but their pride was hard to break. There were those who sought to rebuild their forces in secret, hoping to regain their former dominance. But they quickly learned that the galaxy would no longer tolerate their old ways. The first major rebellion came from the Carrion remnants, the once feared military caste of the now-defunct Carrion Empire. Their ships, though outdated, still held deadly power. They made a bold move to retake control of a strategic system, but the new Galactic Council, led by former rebel leaders and free systems, was ready. The galaxy had changed, and those who still clung to the old ways quickly realized that their power had waned. The Death Worlders' message had been received loud and clear. The Age of Empires was over. Even more telling was the formation of the Galactic Reconstruction Task Force. This new force, composed of former soldiers from all sides of the war, worked tirelessly to rebuild the shattered planets. Where once there were only scars of destruction, there now grew signs of renewal. Cities that had been reduced to rubble began to rise again, this time with the focus on peace and cooperation, not conquest. The Death Worlders had not simply destroyed empires. It had given the galaxy an opportunity to rebuild itself from the ashes, in the heart of the galaxy. The capital, once held by the Tyranian Empire, was now a bustling center of diplomacy. No longer a symbol of tyranny, it had become the seat of a new government. The leaders who once sat on their thrones, ruling with fear, had been replaced by representatives from the outer systems. The voice of the people was now stronger than ever, and those who had once ruled in fear now learned what it meant to listen as the galaxy began to rebuild. Whispers of the Death Worlders' return began to circulate. Rumors swirled that they were watching, silently observing the changes they had set in motion. Some wondered if they would ever return. Others, now free of the Empire's oppression, whispered that the Death Worlders had already given enough. Their justice had been served, and it was time for the galaxy to find its own way. Yet, the galaxy would never forget the lesson taught by the Death Worlders. Justice is not negotiable. The Death Worlders had not come to conquer. They had come to restore what had been taken. The debt was paid in full, and with it came the ultimate price: the fall of the empires. The lesson was clear. No power, no matter how great, could stand forever against the tide of justice. As years passed, the galaxy found a new rhythm. The people of the stars learned to live without the constant fear of tyranny, in the memory of the Death Worlders, of their unwavering resolve. Their unbreakable sense of justice remained etched in the minds of every citizen. They had paid the price for their freedom, and now stars were theirs to shape as they saw fit. The Death Worlders had completed their mission, but their legacy would live on. Not as conquerors, but as the Galactic Reckoning, the ones who had reminded the galaxy that no empire, no matter how powerful, could ever stand above the need for justice. And as the last of the old empires were swept away into the void of history, the galaxy looked forward to a future where the strong would no longer oppress the weak. The stars had been cleansed, and the galaxy, at last, was free. Asterisk.